Truthspresso, episode 344.
In a world gone bonkers,
it is not, generally speaking, unruly, but fires have been started, and
where the culture is a dumpster fire,
we're coming for your children,
and churches have lost their way.
I am really uncomfortable with the story of the crucifixion.
It's time to wake up with Truthspresso.
Truthspresso.
Your weekly shot of truth. And now your host, Daniel Minnick.
Well, hey there, friends, family, foes, and of course, lurkers alike. This is your host, Daniel Minnick, for another exciting episode of Truthspresso. And of course, I expect that there could be a lot of lurkers for this episode, especially on a hot button, politically charged topic like this, because we're going to discuss a certain bill in the Colorado legislature that, as of this recording, is headed to the governor's desk, where he is most certain to sign it. And so we continue to ask for your prayers on the heart of the governor, but also for God to work his power in the state of Colorado and to change hearts and to protect people who need to be protected from evil people, especially children. So who will think of the children when it comes to this bill? And I am actually joined in studio here with two special guests. One of them is one who's a regular co-host. It's been a little while, but I'd like to welcome back my sweet, beautiful wife, Chelsea. Sweetheart, welcome back to Truthspresso.
Yes, thanks for having me join you again.
And so my other guest for this episode is our oldest son, Aiden. So Aiden, welcome to Truthspresso.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us for the first time on Truthspresso to kind of co-host with us and talk about this bill. It's called HB 25-1312. That sounds like a lot of numbers. 25 stands for the year 2025, and 1312 is the number of the bill for the session. And this bill is called Legal Protections for Transgender Individuals. And it's also nicknamed the Kelly Loving Act. So we're going to look a little bit at why it's called the Kelly Loving Act, see a little bit of a proposed justification for this bill. So as a background on this bill, you perhaps have heard about the tragic Club Q shooting in Colorado Springs. So a guy named Anderson Lee Outrage entered the Club Q in Colorado Springs near midnight on Saturday, November 19th, 2022. So the events kind of continued on into the morning of the next day. And this was during a dance party, and I'm not really going to go into details of what this is all about because, as you might know, the Club Q was a place where all sorts of alphabet people go, LGBTQIA2 spirit plus whatever people, they go and they do stuff.
Yes, thanks for keeping that a little bit more on the low-key side.
Yes, we don't need to really talk about it, and I would not consider myself an expert on what goes on there, but just for the purpose of this event. So Aldridge killed 5 people and he injured 25 others, so this qualified as a mass shooting. And one of the victims who died was a so-called transgender woman, in other words, a man who claimed to be a woman named Kelly Loving. So, of course, the name Kelly is the trans name, not the original name. Now, I often wonder why people get involved in these types of situations, but then we also question why it is, what motivates some people to go into places with crowds and start shooting people. So Aiden, what do you think might motivate some people to take some guns, go to a place where there's a bunch of people and shoot them?
Probably they don't think they have a reason to live, and so they're trying to take as many people with them that they can.
That's a good answer. And why do you think they might not feel like they have a reason to live?
Yeah, they probably didn't have a home where they had loving parents and or didn't know Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that sounds like the key behind a lot of these shootings. It seems like politicians like to blame it on the guns, or they like to blame it on Christianity, or they like to blame it on, certain political views that they don't like. But sweetheart, we talked about this a few years ago when the Uvalde shooting happened in Texas, and we'd found more about the shooter there. Of course, she came from a broken home and didn't really have parents who love them. And so most of the times when these shootings happen, it isn't because of the gun, it isn't because of so-called right-wing propaganda. It's because of a bad situation in the home, and also not an understanding of the purpose and meaning of life through the gospel of Jesus Christ.
I think didn't our church just start a new series on going back to like understanding creation and kind of looking at why we're made, like what's our purpose? Why are we here? And it's sad when you see these different shootings like this where people don't have that foundation of that they have a purpose and they have a reason to live. But like you said, when they don't have that loving home or even know who Christ is, they don't understand like that they're made with a purpose, that they're made amazingly, and they just don't understand that. And it's so sad.
It definitely helps when you have that understanding and purpose, and then it also helps when that can be combined with being raised in a home that teaches that and has good parents. I mean, lots of people, come from broken homes, some of us here even experience that, but that's where the understanding of truth and the gospel comes from, and it helps when you have parents that actually teach that and exemplify that. And so now back to Aldrich when he was on trial. What's interesting is that he insisted that he was non-binary and that his pronouns were they, them. And as I was researching this and looking through the Wikipedia article to find out about the Club Q shooting, it would refer to Aldrich with they, them pronouns, because you have to honor that once someone suggested in this culture. And of course, the critics claimed that Aldrich, we don't really think that he was really non-binary. This was just a defense tactic. This was self-preservation. This was a way to avoid some of the charges. And you know what? I think I agree with these critics here, but it also demonstrates the problem that, well, how could anyone truly know whether someone's genuinely a different gender or if they're using it with some kind of motivation? Political status, cultural status, influencer status, what have you, who knows? And that's a problem with this issue here. So in June of 2023, Aldrich pleaded guilty to the state charges and was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms, plus 2,211 years in prison without parole. Think he'll get out of jail at some point, survive that?
Probably not.
And then the next year, pretty much a year later, he pleaded guilty to the federal charges and was sentenced to 55 life sentences plus 190 years without parole. So with all that combined, I think he's stuck in jail for the rest of his life. And I think as Christians, we all agree that if you murder someone, you should go to jail at least, or according to the Bible, an eye for an eye. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. So you should be executed if you murder someone. But with these kind of sentences, using numbers that are kind of off the number line here for the sentences, it just seems to me that it was because of the particular people who were shot, that although that's tragic and wrong, it seems like there's a little impunity going on there. Like, how dare you? This is so horrible that you killed these type of people. We have to call down fire and brimstone on you and multiply years.
I was wondering about that because there's been recently just in the news with some of the illegal aliens that have been in our country and have horrendously killed other people, and they don't get any severe charges, or some of them have been just left to roam free, or they're trying to be freed from any punishment. It's like, why are we letting some criminals that still cause horrific turmoil and kill people? Sometimes they can get away with it, but in this case, it's like you said, it's kind of overboard with all these life sentences and years in prison on top of that. Okay, if you're going to have a life sentence, you just need one life sentence, and that means you're not getting out of prison at all. So it's just, I think how you pointed out, that's really overboard, and it just shows how non-just our justice system is.
Yeah, because if you add up all the people who were killed and even just injured as a life sentence, they got more life sentences than all that combined. So, what do we think about this as we analyze the background of this club shooting and how it is the justification for the bill we're going to get to, which tries to regulate society to accommodate transgenderism? What do you think, Aiden? Does this bill have any basis in a shooting at a club? I mean, like, shouldn't it just be, hey, don't shoot people in clubs? Or why would you create a bill affecting people's speech or what names they use and dress codes and stuff like that?
Yeah, reading through the bill for the first time, I didn't know the background of it. Reading through it, I didn't even realize that there was a shooting or anything like that involved with the making of this bill, and now knowing that, it doesn't make any sense with what is in the bill.
Yeah, because it seems like the bill is kind of like really an attack on Christianity. It's an attack on people who don't support transgenderism, to say that you might as well be the shooter at Club Q if you don't affirm this. It's all just hate. Even if you're trying to convince someone not to go down that route, you might as well just shoot them. That's what it seems like to me. Yeah, I think you got it spot on there, Eden. So the bill has gone through amendments since it was first introduced, and the original version of the bill was very controversial. Now, it still is, but the original version of the bill, to me, it just seems like George Orwell's 1984. It was like horrible. So the sections of the bill, it had 10 sections. The final version of the bill takes out some parts and adds some parts, but section 1 of the original version of the bill called it the Kelly Loving Act. That's all section 1 does, is say this is the Kelly Loving Act, to declare that it's based on that one of the 5 people who was killed. And section 2, it updates the legal definition of coercive control to include threatening to publish material related to gender-affirming care and deadnaming or misgendering. And then it also adds the category of coercive control to existing statutes that talk about courts considering reports of domestic violence in child custody disputes. So in other words, if parents are getting a divorce and they're disputing over who gets custody of a child, well, this bill is telling the judges in courts to consider coercive control. It's adding that category to what they should consider, and adding to the category of coercive control, deadnaming or misgendering. So if one of the parents wants the child to go through with gender transition and the other parent objects, and they're getting divorced probably over that issue, then the court because of this bill, would likely is advised to favor the parent who wants to transition the child to another gender over the one who refuses to accept that, and could say that using the name that's on the birth certificate or refusing to use pronouns that are different, that's coercive control.
Was this the section that originally had all the language in there too about if parents didn't go along with the child transitioning, that the child could actually be taken away from the home?
Yeah, that's kind of what this section was about, but the idea of who could get custody. I know that was kind of an implication, but in the language of the bill, it didn't just say remove a child from a home, but it determined with a custody battle who would likely end up with the child. And we could see any parent who would want to use a child as a pawn, maybe even be an influencer, getting all kinds of money because of supporting transgender things, could try to convince the child, I think you're the wrong gender. And then if the other parent objects, then it would be like, oh, you're the one who's coercively controlling the child.
Doesn't this section just raise questions of, like, who's in charge? It sounds like this is letting kids be in charge and make those decisions of, like, I want to change my gender. Now, parents, you have to listen to this and go along with this, versus parents actually parenting and training their kids and teaching them. Going through puberty, yeah, you're going to feel odd and strange in your body. That everyone feels that way, like helping them work through some of those awkward stages and things, and like actually letting the parents parent, versus it just seems like this section specifically is really switching those roles where the children are making these decisions. And Aiden, I remember you recently telling me a good scenario of how to think through that logically. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, so what I said was, you wouldn't let a kid choose for lunch between a bowl of salad and a bowl of candy. So why would you let it choose what gender it is when it can't even make simple decisions about lunch? But this is a big decision that could change the rest of their life forever.
Definitely. And the irony and even the hypocrisy of all that is that I don't know how many Democrat legislators that support this stuff would fight to change the laws regarding getting tattoos. You know, it's like you still have to be older. You know, is it like 18 to get a tattoo? But that's just something that's on your skin, but you can have skin removed. You can have your body mutilated if you just decide that you're a different gender than your body says that it is. Why would we even support the current laws making tattoos only allowed at 18 because the child's too young for tattoos? There's also alcohol and cigarettes and guns and, you know, all kinds of things like that. But on this issue that can, as you said, Aiden, can affect them for the rest of their life, they can decide it at like 3 or, when they're hitting puberty. Yeah, there's a clear agenda here. And it's not consistent. So Section 3 of the original bill, excludes the state of Colorado from any requirement to cooperate with other states' laws that restrict gender-affirming care for children, and excludes Colorado from honoring court rulings from other states in custody battles about the same topic. So let's say that an Oklahoma court ruled that one parent was grooming a child to believe he or she is a different gender and granted custody to the other parent. If the gender-affirming parent snuck the child into Colorado, maybe on a day of split custody or something, the government of Colorado could essentially tell the more reasonable parent who won custody in Oklahoma, because he or she was a sensible, loving parent, well, tough luck there. We don't have to uphold a ruling from another state like Oklahoma. We won't cooperate with you getting your child back. At best, you could try to be a vigilante, but hey, you're no Batman. You just be looking for trouble. Just give it up. Once that child crossed our state lines, you lost. It's like fugitive harboring. It's okay, it doesn't matter what laws the other states have. If a renegade parent snuck a child into Colorado, then it's like that parent wins even if they lost in court.
It's like sickening how Colorado's just become this supposed safe haven for abortionists. So if an abortionist kills a woman, let alone killing the child in another state, he can come and practice in Colorado without any restrictions on his license. Or if he kills someone in Colorado too, like there's no punishment for him. So we're letting abortionists come here and practice and continue killing babies and women. Now we're saying, oh, it's okay for these kids who are confused about their gender to come here and we'll keep them safe and help them transition, even though we know statistically, we know medically that there's so much harm done to these children. Colorado is not a safe place. It's a place of death for the unborn, the born, and these children that are going to be mutilated, all under the guise of, this is a safe place. You can bring your kids here to transition, or you can have your abortions here. Like, what has happened to Colorado? It's just sick how it's turned out to be this like place of death.
Yeah, like trying to compete with California to see which of the two could be the most woke fastest. When I was listening to testimony, and we'll play some clips in a little bit, one Republican legislator suggested that Colorado could eventually start turning around after laws like this cause enough people to wake up, and so we'll have to see. So Section 4, publicly funded schools that have policies about chosen names for students must uphold any student's chosen name for any reasons the students may have. So it's like, okay, it doesn't matter what your legal name is on your birth certificate. If the child just picks a different name, the school is obligated to use that name. And of course, chosen name is going to be defined according to gender in this original bill, gender identity. So we could see that there's a lot of focus also on public schools because we know that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. And then Section 5. So Section 4 is about chosen name. Section 5 is about dress code. So any school dress codes must not enforce them according to biology. So if a school has one set of dress codes for males and another set for females, this is kind of a, for example, they can keep those codes, but they must allow students to choose which of those to follow at any time. So even if you come up, boys must wear this, girls must wear this, you cannot have any control of who follows what. Any thoughts on that?
So Section 4, you can choose any name, even if it's something crazy like Numino ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis.
In the original version that we're looking at, there is nothing that said that your name couldn't be that. So, yeah, make the teacher struggle to say your name. Yeah, that would be one way to use this bill for humor.
And it says for any reason,
Yeah.
so if it's for humor, then they have to still follow along with it.
Yep, and the bill does say for any reason there.
So I really like the Christian Home Educators of Colorado. They put together some information about this bill and how to continue to fight for it and kind of what the newest version says. And they specifically talked about the Section 5 and the dress code. And I liked how they pointed out that the mandates in this make it almost so burdensome on the teachers and the principals. Like all the staff at the school now, they're going to be more concerned about calling kids by the right names, what dress codes they're allowed or not allowed, and we're not focusing on what they're actually there for, education and learning. How are they supposed to be teaching them about math and reading and history, and when they have all these other added things to their plate now of, okay, oops, I called that person by the wrong pronoun now. Am I going to lose my teaching license? Or also how it compels their free speech. So if you're a school teacher in one of those schools and that's against your belief to call someone by a different gender, then how do you handle that? you either have to go with your convictions and risk losing your license or your ability to teach, or you go against your beliefs and you call them by the name that they want to be called by. So there's just a lot that is being put on these educators now with all of this too.
How much you have to be concerned about what you say in a state, in a country that supposedly has a Constitution amendment, the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights, that the government will pass no law, the Congress will pass no law abridging the freedom of speech. But that doesn't sound like free speech if you get in trouble for just using a wrong name for someone or forgetting, like pronouns and people did bring that up a lot of times, believe me.
The good news is Striving for Eternity would love to come to your church to spend 2 days with your folks teaching them biblical hermeneutics. That's right, the art and science of interpreting Scripture. The bad news is somebody attending might be really upset to discover Jeremiah 29:11 should not be their life verse. To learn more, go to strivingforeternity.org to host a Bible interpretation made easy seminar in your area.
Section 6 of the original bill, it updates the requirements of schools to create a safe school plan. So that's already a requirement, but it updates the requirements so that the dress code policy that's given to students does not force the code based on, actual gender, and allows the students to choose which codes to follow. So the students have to know that they're not obligated to follow one of the two dress codes and so on. Section 7, public entities, so anything related to or controlled by government agencies, public schools that issue forms for people to fill out and that ask for the person's legal name. Now, those forms must include another blank to write in a chosen name. And so whenever someone submits a form that fills in the chosen name with something different from the legal name, then any forms that are issued to that same person after that must honor the previously submitted chosen name. We'll see what happened to that section and why, because even sometimes crazy legislators have to think through things like money. Section 8 adds some terms and their definitions to the statute about state definitions. So there's a statute that lists state definitions. Different bills will amend, add, remove as they deem necessary. These include chosen name, dead name, and misgender. So dead name then means to use the legal name instead of a chosen name. Misgender means to use pronouns that aren't the person's preferred pronouns. Since anyone is prone to making mistakes, they're going to understand that kind of thing. But if someone continues to dead name or misgender after the person has warned them about it, then it shows why these definitions are added in the first place. So it doesn't really give a particular penalty, but it's kind of raising like, this shows why we put this definition in the first place if someone does this. So Section 9, it adds a new section to the anti-discrimination statutes that makes it illegal to publish materials in a place of public accommodation that dead name or misgender someone. Now, the current statute says that a place of public accommodation does not include a church, synagogue, mosque, or other place that is principally used for religious purposes, so the law theoretically would not affect people in church misgendering or dead naming or such, for now. And then finally, Section 10 declares the bills necessary for public safety. A lot of Colorado bills will have a statement of why this bill is passed and stuff, but of course, what else other than public safety? And all public safety bills go into effect when they're signed.
So I have a question about Section 9 right quick.
Okay.
When it's talking about that it's illegal to publish materials in a place of public accommodation, like if you have a bathroom sign and it says like men or women, would that be considered illegal? Because you're naming the bathroom man, this one's for men, this one's for women.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Maybe that's not what they were thinking about. I'm guessing like it could be directed more toward if you have signs, flyers that refer to someone by their dead name or their original name on purpose, and then maybe a public official has become transgender, but then in some public venue you have flyers or bulletins or something that don't follow the guidelines here, then you can't get around other requirements by publishing materials. That's what I'm guessing the intent was. Now, I would imagine people would find ways to harass truth seekers. Who knows with bathrooms and stuff like that, how that could fall under here. So that's the original version of the bill. Now, I'd like to play a few clips from stuff that was hashed out for this bill, and then ultimately it resulted in a heavily amended bill that has its pros and cons. Let me play a clip from the Colorado House Judiciary Committee on April 1st. And this was one of those controversial statements by one of the Democrat legislators that got reported in the news. So I'm going to play this clip here.
That we are passing. But a well-stakeholdered bill does not need to be discussed with hate groups. And we don't ask someone passing civil rights legislation to go ask the KKK their opinion.
So someone was raising the question about, like, they had all these stakeholders that were in favor of the bill to testify for it, and they're kind of stacking the deck there. So when someone raised the question about all the stakeholders, that was one Democrat legislator's response to that, saying, well, if we're passing civil rights legislators, you don't go to hate groups and ask their opinion about it or ask their permission about it or their input for it. And so thinking of a bill like this with the restrictions it puts on people and the requirements and such, she's comparing opponents to this bill as hate groups being against civil rights laws, and that you don't go to the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, the racists who are trying to prevent black people from voting or even hanging them or burning them. That's the way some of these people think, it seems.
And unfortunately, this is not an April Fool's joke.
Oh, yes. You recognize that this was on April 1st. Yes, it was definitely not an April Fool's joke. So I heard some good testimonies after the legislators kind of did their own debates. Then they had some testimonies on April 1st there from some people. I'll play one that talks about that it's the parent's responsibility to train a child.
I believe in God's design for the family, and I cannot support a bill that undermines the God-given responsibility of parents to guide and raise their children. As Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. One day, all of us will stand before God and be judged for our actions, whether we are raising children or passing laws. This bill, which claims to protect rights, actually infringes on free speech, undermines parental authority, and religious freedom.
Parents' responsibility to raise children, when we see verses like that from the Bible, train up the child in the way he should go, and when he's old he won't depart from it. So what is the way a child should go? And if it's the parent's responsibility to train the child, that presumes that children might need some guidance. And if you have children going through puberty, children confused about gender, which most of the times that happens because nasty people at schools try to make them question that, make them think that way, take advantage of their confusion. So I think the Bible is not in favor of this kind of bill. One more testimony, and then we'll see some interesting things that were on April 4th and some good things that some of the legislators said in arguing against the bill.
That is what we need to hear tonight. All of the emotional pleas, everything is super important, but it comes down to this being unconstitutional. What kind of society are we becoming when a parent can lose custody of their child, not for abuse, neglect, or endangerment, but for using the name they gave their child at birth? That is what this bill enables. The weaponization of the courts to punish parents for holding personal beliefs that the state no longer tolerates.
So it takes parents like that to put things into perspective. So it could be illegal for parents to call their child by the name they gave him, the legal name on their birth certificate. Make it make sense. So now, Colorado House Legislative Day 87, this is on April 4th. Democrat Representative Rebecca Stewart gives her summary of how she understands what the bill does.
This bill really is in three buckets. First, it clarifies protections in child custody, that supporting a child's gender identity is indeed in the best interests of the child, and that support cannot be used against a loving and supportive parent in a dispute. Secondly, this bill ensures equity in treatment across policies in schools. If a school has a policy of notification, of parental notification of chosen names, it must apply equally to all children in that school. If a school has a dress code, children must be able to wear whatever they want within that dress code. The third thing the bill does is clarify and clearly define deadnaming and misgendering in the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act.
So the bill shields loving parents. It protects them. Now, loving parents, meaning those who are trying to affirm the child's new gender. Those are the parents who need protecting, according to Representative Stewart. Another short clip from what she was talking about a minute later.
This bill is truly the least that we can do. Frankly, I wish that we didn't have to bring this bill. But the reality of navigating our world today as a transgender human necessitates it, and this community deserves all of our support right now. And I urge an aye vote.
So this bill is the least we could do. Just think of how, okay, there's a lot of outrage over this bill, and yet she's saying this is the starting point. This is the least we could do. You know, think of Kelly Loving, who was shot, you know, that kind of thing, to support this trans community. And she said, like, I wish we didn't even have to have this bill because it should just be a given that this is the way we do things around here. That's the mindset that we're dealing with here. Now, I'll go to Representative Jarvis Caldwell and what he thought about this bill.
Representative Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I heard this bill in Judiciary Committee, and I have to say, if you know me, you know I'm not a very hyperbolic person. And so what I'm about to say, I hope you take it to heart. This is the most egregious bill I have seen this entire session. The idea that misgendering your own child is considered a coercive control, which is another word for abuse, child abuse, because you want to get your child help instead of affirming their delusions, and you can lose custody over your child over that. This is the most disgusting bill I've seen so far.
On one hand, we have someone who's saying this is the least we could do, and I wish we wouldn't even have to have a bill to do this stuff. And then we have someone saying this is the most egregious bill I've ever seen. So definitely have two sides to this issue. So then Representative Ken DeGraff, he was pretty good, and he pointed out how the alleged anti-discrimination protection in this bill actually leads to thought control.
So you classify the terms as discrimination, and then you say discrimination is not protected under free speech. So gets kind of into the slippery slope of the tyranny of controlling language for the purpose of controlling thought, for the purpose of controlling people, which is what this bill is about.
I would say he sounds a little based there. He sees where it's going and what the motivation behind it is. What I like about Representative Ken DeGraff, further on, he points out, because the coercive control talks about the liberty of the child in gender affirming, but he explains what true liberty is based on.
Coercive control includes a pattern of behavior that takes away an individual's liberty. And liberty, I think a great example of liberty would be freedom with a moral basis, a moral foundation, or freedom, and strips away the individual's sense of self, including the individual's bodily integrity and human rights.
So he was quoting from part of the bill there, but he interjects. He says, I think that liberty is based on morality. What are the freedoms all about? Is it the freedom to just do whatever you want, however destructive it is to yourself or others? Or is liberty about pursuing goodness, pursuing hard work, taking care of family, being able to speak the truth? And then he points out how the bill would stand to criminalize parents for protecting children.
But let's talk about coercion. This bill is coercion. This bill is coercive control. It's coercing parents.
The bill, instead of coercive control protecting from, it's introducing coercive control to parents. Representative Max Brooks points out how the Club Q thing is just an excuse.
I am honestly a little offended that in Section 1, short title of this act is the Kelly Loving Act. The Club Q shooting, while incredibly tragic, has zippity-doo-dah to do with this. It's a misappropriation of emotion. Taking a tragic story, sad story, terrible story, and misappropriating it to policy.
Next clip I have is from Representative Scott Bottoms, and we've listened to Scott Bottoms argue in other bills. I think he's pretty good, and I like what he has to say about truth.
Did you know that he's a pastor too?
Oh, yes, he is a pastor, so that would seem to indicate why he says things the way he says them here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you ahead of time for lots of leeway. This bill really is about a crisis. We're having a major crisis. We were having the crisis in our country, but our country is starting to swing back the other direction, the proper direction, the right direction when it comes to these subjects. In the state of Colorado, we're still having a crisis of truth. We don't like truth in this state and definitely in this room. Truth is not subjective, though. That's the interesting thing about truth. I hear these statements all the time, my truth, your truth. Truth is absolute. There is something called truth, and there is everything else. Once you put a qualifier on truth, in other words, my truth, your truth, the word truth has to be taken out of the sentence because it's no longer applicable. Because it's not your truth. There is truth, absolute truth. And interestingly, truth does not originate with humans. Truth comes from God. Lies come from Satan. In fact, that's actually a quote from the Bible. Satan is the father of all lies. And so as human beings, we don't actually create truth or create lies. We propagate one or the other. We get our truth from God or our lies from Satan. But they don't come from humans. Humans don't actually have the ability to create any more than Satan has the ability to create. Satan doesn't create, God creates. The best I can do is co-create. So what I try to do is I try to co-create with God rather than Satan by speaking truth. Lies are co-creating with Satan. The truth is, boys are boys and girls are girls. And no matter how many times you say that differently, change that, put it into bills, put it into books, say whatever you want, do whatever you want. There is XX, there is XY, boys are boys, and girls are girls.
Sometimes it takes someone like a pastor who's also a representative to point out the obvious concept that truth is absolute, because if it's not absolute, there's no such thing as truth, and point out what's staring everyone in the face. to point out the obvious. Boys are boys and girls are girls, and that Satan's the father of lies. And bills like this who want to coerce people into lying by trying to pretend that someone is not who they really are and punish them for speaking the truth. And Representative Scott Bottoms articulated that pretty well. My final clip comes from Representative Brandy Bradley.
You're coming after our rights, and we're not going to stand for it. My kids deserve the honor to live their life too. My boys deserve the honor to know they're beautifully made boys in the eyes of their Lord and Savior. I'm not creating a bill to tell you how to mandate or take care of your children. And you wonder why we're so passionate? Because you're not taking our kids. You're not coming after our children, and you keep doing it time and time again. And there's going to be lawsuit after lawsuit, and we're going to come. This is an attack on parental rights. This isn't about a shooting victim. This is your reasoning for coming after the parents' control of their children, their ability to raise their children, love their children, know what their children are going through. The state can't do that. The state can't nurse a heartache. The state can't nurse a bellyache. The state doesn't do that. And yes, it is a line in the sand. It is. And if you vote for this bill, the state will be on the hook for millions because we will sue and sue and sue and sue again. You have teachers taking kids away from their children. You have trusted adults every week in the paper in this state taking children away from their parents. It will not continue to happen. I will not let it happen, and the constituents in my district will not continue to let it happen. Coercion is lying to children. XX is girls, XY is boys. That is truth, and we are here to bring light to that truth. I urge a no vote on this bill.
She's always a firebrand.
The Christian podcast community is a cohesive group of like-minded Christian podcasters proclaiming the truths of Christ with expertise and passion in the areas of theology, church history, Christian living, evangelism, apologetics, parenting, homeschooling, sermons, and much, much more. So check us out at christianpodcastcommunity.org. christianpodcastcommunity.org. One stop for all your favorite Christian podcasts.
So what has happened since then as the bill has gone through the committees, gone through amendments? It has been updated since the original version, and I won't go into a whole lot of detail here for the sake of time. So some of the stuff that we talked about from the original bill, thankfully, is gone, and I think it's because of a lot of the outrage that people gave, a lot of the testimonies, a lot of the concerns. As far as I know, like one of the protests on the state capitol, there were, I think, 10 times as many protesters against the bill as for the bill, and the same with testimonies against the bill. There were, I think, as usual is the case, it's like 3-1, I think maybe even more on this one. In the final version of the bill, so sections 2 and 3, the ones about the custody issues, the coercive control updates, and then the custody thing, those are entirely removed, which is definitely a good thing. And then in their place, this new sections 2 through 5, which are updating existing statutes about marriage and civil union licenses. So basically, for all of them, it has to do with the idea that if you change your name, you can request an updated version from the county clerk. The county clerk's obligated to give you a new document that doesn't say it's an amended version, but it has the name change on it, and the effective date's still the original one. not ideal, but it's definitely better than the Orwellian stuff that were in those original sections.
So I wonder how county clerks feel about this. Like,
yeah, a lot more burden now on county clerks.
yeah, because if you're a believer and you're working as a county clerk, I would have a hard time wanting to go along with some of this out of your convictions.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like this bill puts so much pressure on so many different people. And I liked how Brandy pointed out on hers, there are going to be so many lawsuits because this affects so many different levels of people. You know, we have county clerks and teachers and all these different people that are going to end up with these conflicts. I mean, hopefully they end up with these conflicts of, am I going to do what's right, or am I going to just go with the flow and continue letting these kids be harmed?
It's not good, but it's not as, I mean, maybe the county clerks would beg to differ. But yeah, so then some other changes. The new Section 6 corresponds to the old Section 4 about public schools and student names. So chosen name in this section is now a name that differs from the student's legal name. They've kind of changed some of the wording that has to do with defining chosen name. That still seems like it means the same thing, but it's not as codified, I guess, for that section there. Section 7 is the same as sections 5 and 6 about public schools and dress coding, but the wording has changed. It still requires schools to allow students to choose which code they want to follow, but it doesn't really emphasize like the old one did about gender and gender identity. It's just students should be able to pick which dress code they want to follow. It doesn't say why. So it seems like they're trying to like have the same effect, but not have the emphasis on pushing gender identity policy.
So I kind of wonder, because this has come up a few times with some of the schools I've worked with, where they have a closet of clothing that kids can come to the school and say it's a boy, they come to the school and they want to be a girl. So they have a closet where they can go and get the girls' clothes, put them on, wear the girls' clothes during school, and then they can change back into the boys' clothes again before they go home. And do you think this section here is trying to eliminate that to where they can just be free to wear whatever they want there? But then it's kind of weird because the whole reason they had the wardrobe at school is because the kids are trying to transition without the parental awareness or the parents knowing. The school's kind of covering that piece up from the parents. So it's just kind of weird. Like, I don't understand the whole dress code thing, I guess.
It's like trying to prevent public schools from enforcing that actual boys wear the boy dress code and actual girls wear the girl dress code, and trying to say, okay, well, if the student considers himself the other gender, they could choose, but then they can't force them. Well, since you say you're a girl now, you must wear the girls. Like, it's kind of like throw your hands up and say, I guess they get to pick whichever one they want. You could define two different dress codes, but they could just pick which one they want and not even give a reason for it. It's just kind of strange. Yes.
So aren't you glad, Aiden, we don't have a dress code?
Yes.
I think our dress code is comfy clothes.
So, Aiden, this is something for you to think about, and maybe you'd have an answer for it since you've gotten into like software development and stuff. So the original Section 7 talked about forms and adding a blank to them for chosen name over legal name, and then forms after that have to then use the chosen name probably pre-filled in. And do you have any idea of why this section got removed when you think about it? What would require for compliance with this section that says, hey, and when this bill passes, you got to have new forms that have a new blank, and you have to have stuff that honors the chosen name.
Because then you'd have to go through and change all the documents and stuff, right?
Have to change them all on the computer. And then they think some of those forms, they might be things that get mailed out. They might have a database that has to factor in, oh, here's a new database field, chosen name. Now I got to generate new forms. And what would all that require? Lots of time and the money to pay people to do it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
More paper, more processing. So this section actually got struck fairly early on in the process because people brought up, this is going to cost millions of dollars just to comply with this. They estimated about $14 million. And so it became a bipartisan thing just to take that requirement out.
At least they will consider stuff if it's going to cost money, I guess.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Other times it's like, who cares? Or they'll try to reason why it'll pay for itself. Yeah.
Because, I mean, transitioning kids, so the procedures for that, the hormones for that, all of that is very expensive. And they're trying to use state funds for that stuff. So
that's where they don't think of expense.
Yeah.
But forms, they do. Yeah.
Yikes. Our priorities. Oof.
Yeah. So Section 8, the new Section 8 now corresponds, or is the old Section 8, but there's some updates. The definition of chosen name in the original version was just gender identity or gender expression, and now the updated definition sounds more like civil rights codes, like lists disability, religion, creed, or maybe ancestry, like tribes and stuff. Like there's a whole host of reasons why someone might adopt a new name, maybe like the new Pope Provost calls himself Leo the 14th now, maybe that's a chosen name or something, like that kind of thing, I guess. And then it also adds a qualifier that so long as the name does not contain offensive language and the individual's not requesting the name for frivolous purposes. That's an interesting qualification there. Now, I don't know if the long word you mentioned earlier, Aiden, it would be considered offensive language or not, but that might fall under frivolous purposes. But yeah, wouldn't that invite more lawsuits or more like trying to figure out, so was this a frivolous purpose for why there's a chosen name? Like I understand adding this qualifier for chosen name, like as you said, can you pick anything? Could you force someone to use cuss words as your new name? At some point you have to think with reason, but then it's like, well, now you have to figure out, was this frivolous or not? It sure makes things complicated.
And I think this is horrible for law enforcement because if someone's committing crimes and then they're like, oh, let me go change my name, and now all the records are going to be printed off with their new name, that's going to be a lot of work and time and digging to go track down the person with that previous name that committed all the crimes. It just seems like it sounds nice, like, oh, we can change our name, but there's so many ramifications in just that.
Good observation there, CR. And it's interesting how even law enforcement officers are compelled, like you have a serial killer, and if that killer uses a chosen name, then law enforcement officers are often compelled in the media to use their preferred pronouns or their new name. It's like, who cares? If even disregarding all this stuff, if you commit a crime like that, why should anyone respect your chosen name or pronouns? Section 8 gets rid of the deadnaming that was defined. So I did a text search for dead name, any form of it, and it didn't occur in the new version of the bill. So I guess that's a plus. They got rid of dead naming as a thing that's enforced. And then you have a bunch of new sections. So the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, and then it updates various statutes. Now, sections 10 through 13 are all about documents, and you could change it once before. If you want to change it a second time, you have to get a court order, like a legal name change. But now, to honor Kelly Loving, now you can get your name changed up to 3 times before you need a court order to change your name again for the 4th time on documents. So, yeah, pretty much not much more needs to be said. So the final version of the bill is actually very different from the original bill. It still maintains some of the stuff about chosen name, dress codes. It gets rid of some of the crazy stuff with custody battles and stuff. So thank God for that. It's not to say in any way that the bill is good or even neutral. It's still bad. I'd still recommend people vote against it. But at least it's not. It could be worse is all I could say there.
So I think because it's on Polis's desk now to be signed, could we put a link in your show notes for people to be able to call or email?
Contact.
And let him know, like, please don't vote on this.
I'll definitely put a link there for what I could find for contacting Governor Polis, urging him not to sign it.
Yeah, I have that information. I can forward you there.
Governor Polis's phone number is 303-866-2471. You can call that and tell him not to sign this bill.
And be respectful about it, too.
Yes.
But strongly urge him not to sign it. And give your thought-out reasons for why the bill, as it is still dangerous and complicated. So we'll provide links to show notes for the original bill, the final amended bill, and the audio from where I got the clips that I played, where you could see all the information about the bill, its home site. And so, Aiden, you got some verses that you'd like to share kind of about what the Bible thinks about parenting children.
Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction."
And the next verse is, "My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother." The Bible is definitely in favor of father and mother instructing their children, not the government, not public schools trying to take kids away from their parents or get parents in trouble for trying to raise their children the way the Bible says they should be raised.
And you know why the Bible tells us that we need to raise our kids, like as parents? Because physiologically, the kids are not fully developed. The last part of their brain, the frontal lobe, is the last part to develop. It's usually around age 24 when that fully develops. And that is the part that understands long-term consequences. So we're trying to make kids that don't even have their brain entirely developed making these long-term decisions. And most of the time, these are irreversible changes that we're doing to them and have extreme risks with them. I mean, there's so many studies out there that show how horrible hormones are and the mutilation to their body can be. So many aspects, physiological, psychological, emotional, mental, all that. And somehow we're expecting these young kids to somehow act like adults. And that's why I like your analogy so much, Aiden, because it just kind of goes with what this verse is talking about. Like, God put parents there for a reason. He's telling us, parents, to train our children to give that instruction because they aren't at that place in development to make those decisions yet. And I think that it's sad that our state is trying to force these kids to make those decisions, and a lot of times even behind their parents' back. So, I mean, we as parents, we need to stand up for this, and we need to fight for our children and be there for them and actually stand up for them. How many of these kids are coming from horrible, abusive situations? And instead of these teachers, counselors, doctors helping them actually get through that abuse or get out of that situation, they're saying that they're confused and they need to get in touch with the gender that they're meant to be. And that's not what's going on. We're not addressing the real issue. We're hurting them even more. It's just so sickening and disheartening. And I think especially we're recording this the night before Mother's Day. And like, as a mom, as a parent, it's like, we want the best for our children. And this bill is totally against what every mom, what every dad wants for their child. We want them to be happy. We want them to be healthy. We want to see them grow and to have that purpose in their life. And when you see bills like this that are just so easily passed through our House and our Senate here in Colorado, it's very disheartening. I'm glad that we had these verses to kind of remind us that isn't God's design for the family and that we need to focus on what God says, that we are the parents and we teach and instruct our children.
I'll close out with one verse here. Proverbs 16:22 says, "Understanding is a wellspring of life unto him that hath it, but the instruction of fools is folly." So there's such a thing as instruction of fools, and I think that's what this bill represents. But one who has understanding, like boys are boys and girls are girls, and God designed things and he created and he has a purpose, and Jesus is who he said he was and did what he did, and he's the Savior who died and rose again. That's understanding. And so hope that you enjoyed this episode and that it was informative, and we hope that you pray for the state of Colorado and that you might join in contacting the powers that be here in Colorado and urge them not to sign this bill, and pray for the state of Colorado even after this bill and for other bills that are sure to come up. So stay tuned for the next episode of Truthspresso, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Truthspresso. Be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast app. Truthspresso is a member of the Christian podcast community. Check out other great faith-building shows at christianpodcastcommunity.org.